We're building a foundation for the Standard Nation. Get on the bus and come brew with us.
We've got Medsphere Dreads. Comment below as we walk through the final recap of Duskmourn Standard. Alrighty folks, well, we only had 6 weeks with Duskmourn Standard before Wizards dropped Foundations on us, so let's take a look at what happened. Across those 6 weeks, we covered 30 major tournaments for a total of 240 top 8 slots. By the numbers, Gruul Slickshot came out on top, snagging 41 top 8 slots and a whopping 8 trophies. That's right, the bird flew high this season, grabbing 17% of all top 8s and more than a quarter of all available trophies. Now, Gruul Slickshot was consistent all season, grabbing an even spread of trophies and top 8s across 6 weeks, with only week 2 as its weak point.
Woo. And second place was Dimir Aggro, with 30 top 8s and 4 trophies all its own. 12.5% of all top 8 slots isn't too shabby, and slightly more than that in trophies says a great deal about how effective Dimir was. Let's note that a majority of these happened in the final 2 weeks of Duskmourn Standard, highlighting that this was our breakout archetype.
Golgari Midrange came in third with 23 top 8s and 3 trophies. Now, 9.6% of the top 8 meta share and 10% of the trophy share is a strong indicator that it's going to be a contender going into the next set. And let's note that Golgari Midrange was absent from the early weeks of the meta as well, likely due to the presence of Domain at the time. It rallied from that position, however, going on to place 2 variations in the top 8 at Worlds and capturing our attention. This list only looks to improve with Foundations giving it Llanowar Elves.
Oh yeah, for sure. And our final tier 1 deck was Mono Red Aggro, placing 26 in the top 8s and claiming 2 trophies. Now, that's a strong 10.8% top 8 meta share, but underperformed compared to the other tier 1s in the trophy department, claiming only 6.7% there. However, let's note that 20 of those top 8s came in the past 2 weeks, emphasizing the top 8 list from Worlds. Foundation looks to add more tools, as WotC basically printed Burn as an archetype for Standard, and left us all to figure out the optimal composition for the archetype. Expect some innovation when Foundations drops for this deck.
Mono White Control leads our tier 2 decks with 14 top 8s and 2 trophies this season. This archetype had a steady performance all along, with the occasional upswing week to week, but ultimately performed below expectations. Now, Foundations coming out means there's going to be a chance to add some pieces that help change that narrative, but only time will tell if it actually happens.
Yep. Azorius Oculus underperformed this season, but managed to stick the tier 2 landing with 12 top 8s and a single trophy. This was yet another archetype everyone had high expectations of, but underperformed. In this case, I think we can attribute it more to the hate than anything else. By the time we got to Worlds, we saw the level of hate sitting in everyone's sideboard, based on a record number of Ghost Vacuums present there. This is an archetype that needs to have a stronger plan B if it wants to compete in the top. We'll have to see if Foundations gives us that.
And Domain. Yep, it's back. 12 top 8s, though not a single trophy this season. Domain's reign at the top finally ended as the builds diverged and Atraxa was left behind in favor of Zur and the Overlord package. So far, that deck has been kept out of the limelight in large part due to Slickshot's dominance and its inability to answer the speed demons of the format. We'll have to see if anything from Foundation can change that dynamic as well.
Oh yeah, and Jeskai Convoke managed 9 top 8s, though again, no trophies this season. It's tough to nail down one particular reason this archetype fell from grace, as well as we really all anticipated it would be Pyroclasm, but when you check sideboards, that isn't really present. In the end, it's likely that the splash hate for Slickshot took the wind out of Convoke's sails, but once more, we turn to the new set to find answers.
Over in Brewer's Corner, I'll be taking a look at some hot new Foundations brews, featuring Boros Burn, Golgari Toxic, and even Mono Black Tenacity combo.
And I'll take you through Orzhov Aristocrats, Selesnya Counters, Boros Harevoke, and Azorius Control.
And with that, let's go ahead and move on to our Tier 1 breakdowns, and we can recap this season right by looking ahead, starting with Gruul Slickshot. MJ23 took down a 59-player MTGO challenge last Thursday with Gruul Slickshot, cementing its position at the top to end the Duskmourn season. But rather than look at the particulars of this list, let's take a look ahead at Foundations and talk about what this archetype stands to gain. Now, I don't think there's a ton of cards that fit in, and I don't think we're going to see a ton of those cards in Foundations Max. But what I look at and I notice with this list is that, first of all, if you want Llanowar Elves, if you want any kind of mana advantage mini ramp that can scale with like Innkeeper's Talent, you've got it now. If you want Mold Adder to try to give you kind of a weird counter game that you get to play against the Dimir decks, you've got that option. If you need another way to go into Trample, you have Crash Through. And that's just another, easy cantrip, a little bit of trample, not too shabby. So that's an option as well. But the two that I think are worthwhile and we'll probably see play, Scavenging Ooze and Kellen Planner Trailblazer. Kellen because it scales, and this is a deck that doesn't mind taking time to develop the board state. As much as you think it's like a speed demon deck, it's more of a chess-based positional deck, and Kellen really emphasizes that.
Okay. Certainly some great options. I feel you there. I want to ask the flip side of this question, though. Does the deck have any new hate cards that it should be concerned with?
Yeah, I think Authority of the Consuls is going to come in, and that is a problem for a deck that really enjoys being able to throw hasty creatures out from its hand in the later turns especially, and say, okay, you're going to take 2 points from Emberheart early with haste, and then later in the game you're going to plot a couple slick shots, dump them out, and then smack for 15 points out of nowhere. But Authority of Consuls says, no, you're going to get stutter stepped, and we're going to have a chance to land some removal on that creature without having to worry about tapping out. So to me, that is the biggest hate card coming in. It's the biggest tool that White gets out of the new set, and it's going to be a house.
Yeah, White gets a pretty big boost from this set, as far as what I can tell. All right, let's talk about another list that performed really well, Dimir Aggro.
EJK smashed through an 80-player MTGO challenge on Sunday with Dimir Aggro, one of 2 trophies from this past week alone for the archetype, and a strong starting spot to look at where we evolved the archetype from. Now, this list right here, spicy. We've seen this back and forth on how many Enduring Curiosities or how many Gixes, whether you want Unstoppable Slasher, Preacher, whether you want Mirrex or Dranathrones or Fountain Port. But the new stuff coming in, you get great hate cards. You get Flash Freeze. It's a hard counter for red and green spells. So Golgari, Gruul Slickshot, Mono Red, the 3 other decks in Tier 1, this is a hate card for every single one of those, and that's worth noting. You also get Deathmark. I don't know that that's going to be all that worthwhile, but it is a 1-mana solution to cards like Beza or Sarah Paragon, etc. You get Tribute to Hunger. You get Drake Hatcher potentially. You can go the Demons route and get Abyssal Harvester. You can try and push more of a flash play and get Brineborn Cutthroat and Spectral Sailor. So there might be a Dimir Flash deck that really pile drives in, because if you have Fairy Mastermind, Cutthroat, Sailor, Curiosity, that is 16 creatures with Flash already. That's a lot of ability to control the state of the game, not on your turn. And you still have Urthize if you want. There's so much you can do with that.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of good stuff here, but it makes me wonder, is Dimir just going to go the aggro route, or is Dimir Demons actually going to get back into Tier 1 with Foundations releasing?
So Demons gets Desecration Demon, they get the Abyssal Harvester, so they get some new tools. But I'm going to say that Dimir is not going to be the deck that plays Demons. I think Golgari will be, because Golgari gets Llanowar Elves, and I think it's just that simple. Like, turn 2 Unholy Annex is going to be a nightmare for so much of this format, and Golgari can do that. Dimir has to wait till turn 3. That's a bit of a problem when you're playing that mirror match out, and they're getting it a solid turn ahead of you if you don't have the turn 1 cut down answer to Llanowar Elves. So I don't think Dimir Demons is going to be a deck moving forward, but I would expect Golgari Demons.
Yeah, that makes sense. Golgari goes up the scale, and Dimir probably stays lower. Okay, all right. Talk to us about Golgari Midrange.
So Darius89 made it to the semifinals of the 128-player MTGO qualifier at the end of October, making their list the highest placing in recent history. But let's look at what we get out of this. So this is Dimir Midrange, or Golgari Midrange, but we're basically calling it Golgari Demons at this point. That's what the engine is, right? And they get a few key cards. 1, Llanowar Elves. That's going to slot in at the bottom. That's a 4 of. It's a staple. I don't even think anyone's going to argue that. Turn 2 Glissa, turn 2 Unholy Annex. It's way too good to ignore. You like having extra mana in Golgari. You have things like Mosswood Dread Knight that reward you for having that extra mana. Restless Cottage doesn't mind going early. Fountain Ports. There's so many mana sinks, right? You also get a few interesting cards. You get Dryad Militant, which, for those of you who look at that card and you're like, I don't know what purpose, Oculus. Oculus. Haughty Djinn doesn't matter if you land that on turn 1 and they don't kill it pretty quickly. It also makes the actual reanimation of Oculus rely almost entirely on Helping Hand, because they're not going to get 6 cards in their graveyard with all of those instants and sorceries getting exiled. There's a lot of other cards to talk about, and don't worry, I will cover that later, but Golgari Midrange, there's a lot to be said for this archetype moving forward.
Absolutely. So my question for you, does Golgari really want to stick with this kind of mid-range Demons game plan? What about Golgari Ramp?
I think you stick with mid-range if Demons is better than Ramp, and that's really the only question. Like, do you think you need to go farther up the curve, or is Demons far enough up the curve and provides enough value that that's where you'd rather land? I don't know that there's going to be an answer to that in the first few weeks, but we'll know within about a month or so of the set releasing whether Golgari Ramp just takes it out of contention or not.
Okay, that makes a ton of sense. All right, let's talk about the final deck in our Tier 1 archetypes, Mono Red Aggro.
Jarvis Dashmi took down the 128-player MTGO qualifier at the end of October with Mono Red in a top 8 that had 5 slots taken by Mono Red. Holy crap, that's a ton of red. Now, let's look at what we stand to get in Foundations. There's so much, honestly, guys. Like, Wizards loved red. I don't know why, but they gave, I'm just going to go through a list real fast. Bolt Wave, Kellen Planar Trailblazer, Slumbering Cerberus, Burst Lightning, Fanatical Firebrand, Ball Lightning, Stormkirk Noble, Mindsparker, G2 Lava Runner, Viashino Pyromancer. That's a lot of love for red. I don't know what the optimal build looks like. I think it's going to change a lot, because you have to decide whether you even want the mouse package, or if you move into Burn. And if you move into Burn, do you keep it Mono Red or do you go into Boros? Because they also printed Boros Charm. So, like, there is so much love for Burn right now. And I think the first week especially, everybody's going to get on that train and just speed demon run it up to Mythic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. We talked a little bit about Burn in the Rebel cast. So what do you think about this Hidetsugu's Second Right?
If the format didn't have Painlands, I'd actually be more interested. But we were chit-chatting the other night, Athena and I, and I'm like, okay, so, get them down to 10 Hidetsugus. She goes, tap Painland, deal 1 damage. Uh-oh, they're now I'm at 9. Now Hidetsugus doesn't matter. And I'm like, that's so awkward when a Painland is a counterspell for Hidetsugus. So, no, I don't think it'll see any play. It didn't really the first time. It was a cute, kitschy kind of goal, but, like, trying to hit a moving target with an aggro deck is not easy. You know what I mean? So, like, trying to hit it exactly at 10, and you have to have Hidetsugu's Second Right, it conflicts with what the deck's trying to do. I don't think it'll see any play.
Okay. That's fair. All right, so that does it for our Tier 1 archetypes. Let's jump down into Tier 2, where I will start with Mono White Control. Creeps for Life made to the top 8 of a 62-player MTGO challenge at the end of October. Mono White Control. Pushing back over to red for Immodanes and skewing Jace, the Perfected Mind. So let's talk about what the deck actually gains from Foundations. Quite a bit, actually, but really high quality stuff here. I mean, we're talking about Devout Decree, really good sideboard game plan against Rakdos colors. Authority of the Consuls, which is probably going to see a ton of play considering all the aggro still out there. It's just such a great tempo card. Regal Caracal. I think the Cats archetype is coming back, but even just a few one-ofs of Cats, this one can get out of hand. It really can. Crystal Barricade, which Figure Base pointed out on the Rebel cast, seems to be a really good defense against the burn that's coming. And I agree. I do like this card. Day of Judgment, we get a 4-drop board wipe coming back to Magic. This deck and also Domain as well missed Depopulate. So happy to see Day of Judgment if you're playing those decks.
So, Max, we had at Worlds Dimir Demons showcasing what happens if we just put a mill strategy into the back end of a mid-range deck, and Mono White Control has similarly done that from time to time. The build we just focused on had red for Immodanes, but we've seen it go into blue with Meticulous Archive and Jace. However, they're reprinting a card called Darksteel Colossus, which shuffles your graveyard back into your library if it goes into your graveyard. does that kill mill as an actual tier 1 post-board strategy because people can just slot one of these in their sideboard, dump it in after boarding, and go, okay, well, if you mill me, it all goes back into the library? Like, is this actually just dead now? Is mill dead?
Oh, yeah, I'm shaky on this. I don't think mill's dead, right? You could possibly try to exile Darksteel Colossus, or mill after they draw. I don't know. You have to play around it, I think, is the answer. So I don't think mill's necessarily dead, but this certainly does mitigate how much of it we're going to see in the upcoming set, I believe.
Fair. And speaking of things we're kind of curious to see how much we're going to see, Oculus, let's talk about it.
I do love Oculus. I've been telling everyone you should be on this deck for these final weeks. Look, Locked Core Zero finished in 9th at the 128-player MTGO qualifier at the end of October, really cementing Oculus's underperforming tendencies in Duskmourn while forcing us to really reevaluate how to build it with Foundations coming in. There's going to be a few changes, so let's discuss. One of the first cards I want to point out is Draycatcher. I think this is going to be a must-answer threat for the deck, a deck that really does need more must-answer threats. Vigilance and Prowess. Prowess is going to put in a ton of work, especially considering how many spells you're casting. We get Opt for this deck. Needed it badly. Opt was needed. Also Unsummon. Unsummon was also needed pretty badly as a great tempo option. You also have Authority of the Consuls that you can use here as well, and I think this deck will use that card. And then Kiora of the Rising Tide, another good option for self-mill, and within this shell, I think you're going to create that 8/8 legendary really in no time. So I really do like that card as well.
Now, Max, I look at this deck, and again, we talked a little bit earlier, Dryad Militant's getting printed. Does this deck lose too much to compete if Dryad Militant becomes the norm, or does it have to shift over? What are you expecting?
I think it has to shift over. I think this presents a hurdle for the deck. It really does. The pilots of Azorius Oculus are going to just have to become aware of that card. Unsummon, exile-based removal. You're going to have to answer this card. Stone Brain it if you freaking have to, but I really do think this card also presents a hurdle for an archetype, and Oculus is going to have to just be aware of it.
Fair. And it's not like Oculus can't shift, right? They've got Monastery Mentor. You don't have to rely on instants and sorceries in the graveyard game. So I get where you're going with it. But speaking of another deck that is probably going to need to make some shifts, let's talk about Xur's Domain.
All right, one of my favorite lists recently, Xur's Domain. So Herman Hero made the semifinals of a 59-player MTGO challenge at the end of October with Domain. And as we've done all episode, let's take a look at the new tools and foundations for this deck. So obviously, right off the bat, I'm going to list Land and War Elves. This is a ramp list. You're going to want ramp help. Land and War Elves is perfect. Authority of the Consuls as well. This deck has historically had a tough time dealing with aggro. Authority of the Consuls is a must. I think you might even main board this card. Devout Decree. This is a great sideboard option against your Riktus colors. Crystal Barricade also works here as well to really tempo, get you, allow you to get set up. Deadly Brew is a new card. Really, you're able to sack a token in this list, your White Overlord. You can return a Leyline that got removed, or, another Overlord that got removed. I really like where this card gives you an advantage. Mortify, it's enchantment hate with a secondary mode against creatures, and that's a must right now because enchantments are still out there in the wild.
So, Max, I look at all the new tools we're getting in here. Do you think this deck will be able to deal with hyper aggro now that we're able to modify it and add a little bit more emphasis to the early game?
I do believe so. I believe this deck has shifted significantly even before Foundations. I mean, we've got full sets of Get Lost, Scroll Shift, Not on My Watch in the sideboard. I believe it does stand a much better chance even this week, but especially so with Foundations. Some of the tools I've listed I think are really going to put in work. We also got basically a better 4 mana value board wipe as well that we can add in. So this deck has the necessary board wipes and necessary tempo components to be able to deal with aggro now, I believe. So expect to see it piloted just a bit more when Foundations releases.
Fair. And rounding out tier 2, let's take a look at Jeskai Convoke.
So Arcane 1 finished in 9th in the 80-player MTGO challenge this past Sunday with Jeskai Convoke. This was yet another tier 2 archetype that underperformed all season, but it really has the potential to break out with the right support. So let's see what Foundations has to offer. I only have a few cards to name here, but I do want to name Sear Slicer Goblin, another aggro option that puts more bodies on the board with the raid ability. Dryad Militant, which we just talked about, which is a great card against Oculus. I think that slots in here as well. And then one that I'm really happy with is Sky Knight Squire. This is a really good option. Before, we had Inner Warden to be, kind of the aerial defense. This one, I think, comes out a little bit easier, right? Your Gleeful Demolitions scales with that card really well because you're going to be able to have those 1/1 counters on this creature very quickly. It's going to be a great flying protector, essentially. And that's really what this deck needed. All the Demons decks out there putting in a lot of work and damage. At least now you have a great blocker that you can put up against those decks.
Fair, and I'm imagining a number of games where you get to go like turn 1 Novice Inspector, turn 2 Squire, turn 3 Gleeful plus Sheltered by Ghost. Now there's a 5/4 with Ward 2 and Lifelink going at them in the air. Like, that's an easy sequence, and you can get there.
Yeah.
So I don't know. The card seems spicy. It might be underpowered, but we're going to find out. That said, yeah. I look at this deck, Max. Board wipes. Can we get through the board wipes? Is it possible, or is printing Day of Judgment alongside the Sky Knight Squire just going to wreck us?
I've seen 1 or 2 cards that kind of help with this. Dawn's Truce is one that I've seen in sideboards for Convoke lists to kind of, especially now that we have the Day of Judgment, the 4 mana value board wipe. But that's the hard part of playing Convoke, right? Not only are you having to think about board wipes, you're hoping that your opponent stumbles, especially the domain decks. But all the side hate that the Prowess decks have been catching have been hitting Convoke pretty hard. Going into the new set with all those new tools, Authority of the Consuls, all that, I hesitate to think that this deck will see play right away. Maybe as the meta shakes out a little bit and, the Demons decks, for example, get targeted a little bit more, maybe this deck can kind of, come from the shadows and take its place. But yeah, I think Convoke is going to have a hard time in the first few weeks.
Yeah, that's fair. It's going to get a lot of splash hate from all the aggro that's getting played and everybody trying to answer it. So it could be a little rough in the first few weeks. That said, we're going to move things along. We've got, this is the Brutastic episode. It's all Foundations decks. We wanted to give you guys a bunch of options because you're going to see this on Friday and the set drops next Tuesday. So we got to make sure you have tons of brews to mess around with. So we're going to go ahead and kick things off. Max, tell us about Orzhov Aristocrats.
All right, Orzhov Aristocrats. Credit to Athena the Bun for coming up with this one. This is really just a hyped up, I hesitate to call it a Bats deck, but it takes what Orzhov Bats tried to do and hypes it up so much more. You've got several options here for draining your opponent. That's really what this deck does well. Starscape Cleric finds a place here. Ellis Ilkor, obviously Amalia. These really drain your opponent whenever you're playing creatures, being those conditions. Vengeful Blood Witch from Foundations fits in here as well, and at only 2 mana value, you're going to have this deck set up to do what it does very quickly. This is the perfect shell for Enduring Innocence, so we're seeing all the copies of that here. Also, Raise the Past. Raise the Past finds a really good spot here. You sack all your 1/2 mana value creatures, then you bring them back all at once, and that's a wild play right there. You might even call it a win con in certain conditions. With so much life gain, this deck really seeks to outmaneuver aggro, frustrate the Prowess decks, frustrate the Convoke players. So I'm looking forward to this list putting in work. I really like how she has it positioned here.
Fun fact, Raise the Past brings back Crystal Barricade. Can you imagine how annoying that's going to be for Burn?
Ooh, yeah.
They're just like, we kill it, like, do it again. Do it again. I don't know.
Yeah, a way to give yourself hexproof. That's going to put in a lot of work. Yeah, you're right.
I love that deck so much. I just wish it had like 4 more strong 1-drops. So viewer, if you're watching and you think you have a way to break it, let us know. Put it in the comments. Let us know which 1-drop that you think would make that deck actually complete, because 23 2-drops is a lot of 2-drops, and the curve's a little out of place because of that. So,
yeah.
Alrighty. We're going to go to the next one here. Let's talk about what everybody's going to be playing day one. Boros Burn. Alrighty. It's mostly here already, but we get a few new cards coming in. I think the biggest card coming in here is that Boros Charm got printed. This card is a nightmare to deal with. Like, I don't know how many of you are around. I'm sure a lot of you are new, but this card, when it first got printed, was still a problem. And it's, I mean, 2 mana, 4 damage, or indestructible, or double strike. You see the flexibility that has at 2 mana is immense, right? But you also get Lava Runners in there. Lava Runners are in. Lava Spike is reprinted in a different way. And Burst Lightning is just an upgraded Shock at this point. So, yeah, deck is good. I don't know that a lot of people are going to agree with Razorkin Needlehead. To me, this is like Burn's mini Shelly, and I think it finally has a home now that we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, so 16 burn spells to kick things off. Whether or not you want Monstrous Rage, I'm not 100% sure on, but it sure feels like a burn spell when you have Evasion, when you have First Strike, when you have Nemesis that nobody wants to block. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When was the last time we had a major burn deck in Standard? Was it Eldraine?
It's been a minute. It's been a minute. And when it is, it's usually really good. But they did print the Crystal Barricades. So, like, clearly they're aware of what they're doing, Oh, yeah. Man. Anyway, we'll keep things running. Max, talk to us a little bit about Selesnya Counters.
All right. Credit to Figured Base for coming up with this specific shell here. Yes, I want to answer a question right off the bat because it's been asked before. Yes, this deck wants Land War Elves. If for nothing else, you want to be able to use your Skoos quickly, especially against the Oculus decks. Snakeskin Veil is great here. It also adds the 1/1 counter, so that little mode actually puts in work here. Lots of options to go with in terms of this type of archetype. You could go with some of the Hydras, but I think they're expensive options. I do like the idea of going with Botanical Brawler, Bristly Bill. But what I really like is Dusk Legion Duelist making a return to the meta. The Duelist here is going to give you card advantage turn after turn because it's so easy to put down counters on it. Also, Sky Knight Squire, bringing that back up, gives you an excellent aerial blocker, which is something that I think the 1/1 counter archetype was kind of missing. Ajani, I think, is one of the new Planeswalkers that's actually going to see play because of this shell. At 3 mana value, that's really cheap, and I like all of its abilities for this shell. So the deck is low curve. That gives it an advantage. When I first saw the Hydras, I thought they were going to slot in here. Maybe there is kind of a ramp green 1/1 counter shell out there. You can use those in, but I like going low curve instead here.
Fair. And worth noting, because Hushwood Verge starts on green and goes to white, the amount of times you can go turn 1 Llanowar off of Verge into turn 2 Ajani is decent. And you also still have Razor Verge Thickets and Brushlands. So you do have 18 sources to hit that turn 2 Ajani. That's a little less than 90%, but like, what a play. I also want to note that this list didn't have Enduring Innocence, and it may want it because those creatures all enter at 2 power or less. So we may end up going that way to grind it a little bit harder. But overall, it's a great starting spot. Well done, Figured Base. It's a good starting spot on that one. But let's move things along and talk a little bit about Golgari Toxic. Okay, took me a minute to figure this one out. We're going to go ahead. Credit to Jane Olivia 96. Appreciate the list. The idea here is that Finn the Fangbearer is reprinted, and creatures with Death Touch give 2 poison counters every time they hit. So, when you already have one of these with Toxic 1 and Death Touch, that's 3 poison counters if it hits. That's a quick clock. That has to hit 3 times to get them up to 9, and then you only need 1 more. That's a lot. You also get to play Glissa in a Toxic deck. Seems pretty decent. And even if you don't have Fins, you still have Necrogen Communions, which, that'll protect Glissa while giving it Toxic. We love that. You have removal spaced out just for this. We love that as well. And you have other ways to move things forward. I don't know how strong this is going to be. It feels like it's a little bit underpowered, but at the same time, Death Touch on all these creatures makes it really hard to deal with. Like, they have to have removal spells early because anything else is not going to block it favorably.
Yeah, I recall when Finn was a meta deck a long time ago. I think it was around Kaldheim. I can't recall, but and we had lands back then that could make your creatures unblockable. So it was wild. I'm interested to see how well this deck does in the coming weeks.
Alrighty, with that, let's talk about a deck that nobody's going to enjoy playing against, but I know Athena will enjoy piloting. Azorius Control.
All right, Classic Control is back. I mean, there are so many counterspells in Standard right now that it should be back, honestly. This deck makes use of Split Up, which is a card that, not too many people are playing with, but you should become aware of, especially if you're playing really fast aggro. Of course, Day of Judgment, there's two of in this deck. I think Control needed the 4 mana value board wipe. That was one of the reasons it hasn't been around. The win con for this deck is interesting. It's a full set of Sphinx of Forgotten Lore. Of course, that has Flash. You have to have Flash for a win con in Azorius Control. But it also, bring back spells that tempo the opponent. Bring back your counter spells. Bring back your removal. I think that's why this was selected, and I do like that choice. I don't know. I talked to Athena about this deck, why it hasn't been in existence. But I think now we're in a place where Azorius Control should be in the meta, a part of that rock, paper, scissors kind of dynamic that we talk about in the Standard meta. It definitely has a place. We'll see if it fits in with what's going on.
Well, and that build feels like you're either going to have an unending Snapcaster or you're going to have a Snap Disaster when they kill that creature. And I don't know which way it's going to go. But like it seems to ride or die on that. Now, there's one really cool trick to point out. You can swing with that Sphinx, target this Split Up, and then just hit the untapped creatures if your opponent's holding back on you. And it, Sphinx lives through it, and it's a one-sided Wrath. So that's pretty spicy. That's pretty spicy.
Yeah, that's devastating.
But let's talk a little bit about Mono Black Tenacy combo. All right, so this is one of those beautiful loops of whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. Whenever you gain that much life, opponent loses that much life. And back and forth it goes till they're dead on one swing. So we call that the old Wombo combo. And the nice thing is it's creature-based, and there's enough reanimation with Null Priest of Oblivion that even if they're killing these things, if they aren't exiling them, it's not a problem. You can keep going. I also love that this deck has a Liliana Dreadhorde General at the top end. I'm not saying this is going to be the best walker coming out of the new set because my guess is it won't be, but it's probably the second best one, and it's good. Like, this is something that Mono Black has been craving, a win con that immediately impacts the board position, and it does it so favorably to you because you get that scenario where you just get to resolve it on 6, your opponent loses their 2 worst creatures, which is, if you're playing Mono Black, probably their 2 only creatures at that point. And then you just get to crap out a token every turn, and if they want to trade with it, you just keep drawing cards. So that's not an easy card to answer traditionally, and I love that. The value on it's incredible once you get going.
Yeah, I dig this deck. I really do. We talked a little bit about the possibility of this in the Rebellion, and I'm excited for it. The drain life mechanic needed to see play. We're going to see it in both Orzhov and Mono Black. But let's move on and talk about the last deck I'll be presenting, Boros Harevoke. Credit to Red from the Rebellion Discord. This is the perfect shelf for Arabella. Nobody's really playing with this card. I've toyed with it in Boros Convoke, but here, oh my gosh, I mean, it's going to do a ton of damage. You've got 16 copies of Heir Apparent in here to really drive up the population in your board. So what's not to love with those 2 cards being really the main things in this deck? We've got Caretaker's Talent and Enduring Innocence, really keeping you alive, copying even more tokens. This is really like the aggro version of Mono White Control, right? It's really focused around just beating you over the head with rabbits. War Leader's Call, 2 copies, is actually really good here, doing damage on the way in, doing damage as they're attacking, all those tokens you're creating. Enduring Courage speeds up the clock as well with all those tokens. It's finally sees a slot in a deck here. I like Enduring Courage. I always thought it was a little too expensive, but I think here it fits in really well. And then let's bring up Raise the Past. Raise the Past is also going to put in a ton of work here. I really like that card for this deck, so a full set here. And I just want to mention Boros Charm in the sideboard, protecting your army. I think that's a great card for this as well. So I'm excited to see, and I'm going to try it out actually week 1. I'm excited to see a different type of aggro.
I mean, props for saying Arabella and you wanted to toy around with, because well played on the dad joke since it's a toy as a creature type. Well played.
Glad you caught that.
Alrighty, and with that, we're going to move on to the final deck in Brewer's Corner, Golgari Demons. Alright, of all the stuff we presented in Brewer's Corner, this is one that I personally brewed up, and yeah, I like where this is potentially going. So, Demons with Llanowar Elves. We take out a lot of the duresses in the early game. We say, you know what, we just need to tread water and try to accelerate, right? Abyssal Harvester, I have no idea if this card is good enough or not. Like, it does die to cut down as a 3 mana. Like, you know what I mean? Like, dies to cut down as a 3-drop is not where you want to be, especially in an aggro format. However, it's like the Black Skrelv. It sits there and goes, you have to kill me before you kill other creatures. Otherwise, I will just get a copy of those creatures. And that's not a great scenario for anybody, right? Desecration Demon versus Arcfiend really depends on the meta, because I've had games where Arcfiend, they just gain enough life. And you get to a place with Arcfiend where you're like, I can't clock him in 3 turns, and it's a problem. Whereas Desecration Demon's great until you run up against a tokens deck, and then they just, whatever, just tap it down every turn with the Fountain Port token. So, I don't know that Desecration's correct, but we're starting there, just to see.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this debate as well, especially with all the aerial blockers that are coming to Standard, but also already in Standard, other Demon decks as well. It's hard to really clock them with the Archfiend. So, yeah, I'm on the side of Desecration Demon for now.
We'll have to see what the meta brings, but in the meantime, that's going to bring us to our final segment, Ahead of the Curve. Now, Max, we looked at 16 archetypes in our recap of the season. What are you playing going into the final weekend of Duskmourn Standard before Foundations gets printed?
So for these final weeks, I'm on Golgari Demons still, but a few modifications. So if you've already seen last week's episode, you saw that I was on this deck. I still like this shell, and I'm probably going to be using it going into Foundations as well with all the additions that Riktus just talked about. I like 3 duresses in the main board. Really pick apart the opponent's hand, win the resource war. I added 1 copy of Liliana to the main board as well here. I also still like Reglissa's position, being able to destroy enchantments and being a must-answer threat. Takes the stress off of your demons. You want your demons on the board for as long as possible. Deep Cavern Bat still putting in work. I added 1 main board copy of Terra Sunder and added 1 to the sideboard because, of course, you like both modes on this. You like exiling a creature. You like removing an enchantment. Bloodletter of Aclazotz, I'm still on the full set here. We'll see what happens when Desecration Demon comes to Standard. But I think I'm still on Bloodletter of Aclazotz. A majority of my wins are doubling the damage off of multiple copies of Unholy Annex. And then, of course, the top end is Nissa. I love the enchantment removal. I love just piling on in the board state. So that's the version of the deck I'm going with this week.
Fair. And I mean, it only stands to gain. It's a good deck to pick up regardless of whether or not you think that iteration is going to be, where it ends up, because Llanowar Elves is coming and we know where it slots in. We know exactly where it slots in, and Golgari probably gets the biggest bump. But let's talk a little bit about Dimir Aggro. So first and foremost, I'm not going to claim originality on this. This is credit to Arnie Hushenbeth, a great pro player, really has done a fantastic job, has done a whole series of videos on this. They're great. The one thing I think he missed is exactly 1 card, because this is like 74, 75 out of 75 his list. Sword of Once and Future. If you are not playing this card in the sideboard of Golgari, in the side of Dimir, I'm just going to say you're wrong. You're just wrong, because this card is that good. This card absolutely breaks the mirror in half. This card for Golgari absolutely smokes Dimir if it ever resolves. There are so few answers to it, and it does an amazing job of just saying, you can't swing through me, you can't block me, and if I have any kind of removal in the graveyard, it's 2-for-1s till the end of the game. Like, it's just wild how fast this takes things out of control for you. I've won so many mirror matches with it. Outside of that, folks, the sideboard guide for this is on Coffee and Grinders. Yes, I have like 8 matchups at least, like fully sideboarded out. Yeah, it's ready to rock.
Hell yeah, I like Sword of Once and Future as well. I'm going to probably add that to my Golgari list. That's probably something I forgot about as well. But yeah, that'll put in some work, especially when you see Dimir in Tier 1. But in any event, that's another week in the books. We're looking forward to Foundations. Look out for new content coming your way on that. Thank you for supporting us, and special shout out to all our members who support the Rebellion by watching these videos all the way through.
And I should clarify, next week we will not be back, but the week after we will be here, because next week is Foundations release.
Yeah.
And with Foundations, we have no tournament results to report until Foundations has been around for a minute. But when we're back after week 1 of Foundations results, do not forget to like, subscribe, and comment on this video. Every click helps. And until next time, Rebels, untap, upkeep, resist.